It was supposed to be just another routine morning in courtroom 3B. Judge Linda Hallberg adjusted her robe with one hand and signaled the bailiff to bring in the next case. The usual crowd murmured behind the polished wood benches, attorneys, clerks, and those curious enough to watch justice in motion. When the man stepped forward, his shoulders were slouched, and his eyes were red from crying. His clothes were simple but clean. He looked like someone who didn't belong in a courtroom but had somehow wandered into the system's cold machinery. "Name?" the judge snapped, not even looking up from the case file. "Derek Cole," the man replied, voice quiet, trembling. "Ma'am, she cut him off. Save it. I've read enough already." The clerk's eyes darted up, confused. "Your Honor, that file might be, is this going to take long?" Judge Hallberg rolled her eyes, ignoring the man's desperate look. "Mr. Cole, if you think tears are going to sway this court, you've clearly misunderstood where you are." The courtroom went still. Derek stood there, barely able to speak, trying to form the words. His lower lip quivered, but he clenched his fists to keep steady. His voice was soft but strained. "You don't know who I am." "Oh, I know exactly what you are," she snapped. "Another person wasting this court's time." The room was silent again. Even the stenographer's fingers paused mid-keystroke. But as the judge leaned back in her chair, something happened. The double doors at the back creaked open. Every head in the courtroom turned toward the sound. Two uniformed officers entered first, not with aggression, but with deliberate purpose. Behind them walked a tall, sharply dressed man in his early 60s. His presence alone commanded attention, a quiet authority that didn't need to shout. The courtroom buzzed with low whispers as people began to recognize him. Judge Hallberg narrowed her eyes. "What is the meaning of this?" The man didn't answer. He walked past the gallery, past the rows of stunned onlookers, and stopped beside Derek Cole. He placed a firm hand on Derek's shoulder, not possessively, but protectively. "Your Honor," the man finally spoke, his voice calm but unmistakably firm, "I believe there's been a serious mistake." Hallberg blinked. "And you are?" "Major General Thomas Langford. Department of Defense." A loud gasp rippled through the room. The judge straightened slightly in her chair. "General Langford? What are you doing here?" "I'm here for him," Langford said, nodding toward Derek. "And I suggest you listen very carefully, because the man you just humiliated isn't some nobody off the street. He's the reason half your courtroom is still standing." The color drained from Judge Hallberg's face. "I don't think you read the right case file," the general added, his eyes locked on hers. "Or if you did, you didn't understand it." Derek looked down, then back up, tears still clinging to his eyes, but his expression had changed. He wasn't just a man seeking mercy. He was someone who had earned respect. And the judge was just realizing it far too late. Judge Hallberg's hand trembled slightly as she flipped through the folder again. Her eyes darted across the paperwork she had dismissed minutes earlier, without reading past the first paragraph. Her face flushed as she saw the header, subject, Derek Cole, classified mission commendation brief, level 4 access. She had assumed it was a minor civil complaint. A parking violation. Maybe a probationary hearing. What she missed was the classified stamp tucked beneath a cover sheet, now half folded from her careless handling. General Langford didn't move from Derek's side. "Ma'am," he said quietly, but with weight, "this man served under my command for 9 years. He operated under sealed directives in conflict zones where most wouldn't last a week. He risked everything for this country, including his own identity." Hallberg swallowed hard, suddenly aware of the weight of dozens of eyes watching her. Derek finally spoke. "I didn't want to be treated special. I just wanted to be heard." The judge opened her mouth, then closed it again. Words failed her as she realized how thoroughly she had failed hers. "I assumed," she whispered, mostly to herself. Langford stepped forward. That assumption nearly led to a national disgrace. The courtroom remained completely silent, except for the distant sound of a flag rustling outside the tall windows. The judge, trying to compose herself, looked back up and asked, "Why didn't you say who you were?" Derek's eyes met hers, no anger, just exhaustion. "Because I wanted to see if this system listens to people who don't come in wearing medals." The silence that followed that line was heavier than any gavel. Judge Hallberg sat frozen. For once, she had no rebuttal, no sharp remark, no fallback into legalese. The weight of her own dismissal pressed on her like a vice. She glanced down again at the file, now realizing it wasn't just stamped "classified," it was initialed by multiple high-level defense officials. Derek Cole. The name now echoed in her mind differently. She remembered seeing it before. Briefly mentioned in an internal memo she'd skimmed over a year ago, a commendation tied to an overseas rescue mission that had remained sealed to the public. Only now did it click. He wasn't just a soldier. He was that soldier. "You infiltrated the encampment in Kunar province," she said slowly, her voice shaking. Derek nodded once. "Yeah. I pulled out 7 hostages. But I left a part of myself over there. And instead of coming home to honor," General Langford added sharply, "he came back to bureaucratic chaos, unpaid benefits, and people like you brushing him aside." The room grew colder. Even the court reporter stopped typing, realizing this moment wasn't for the record, it was for history. Hallberg stood up slowly, stepping down from the bench. "Mr. Cole," she said, her voice soft, unsure. "I can't undo what I said. But I was wrong." Derek simply nodded. "Yes. You were." But he didn't gloat. He didn't posture. He didn't need to. Because now, everyone in that room knew exactly who he was. And the judge knew exactly who she had insulted. The judge, still standing in front of the bench, lowered her gaze. Her voice was quieter now, more human. "I've sat on this bench for over a decade. Seen hundreds, maybe thousands of faces. I tell myself I know how to read people. But today, I saw only what I expected, not what was in front of me." Derek shifted slightly, unsure how to respond. General Langford turned to him. "You don't need to say anything, Derek. You already said enough by showing up and standing your ground." The judge took a breath. "I don't expect forgiveness. But I'd like to make this right, in any way I can." Derek finally spoke again, voice even. "Then start by reading the full file next time. For anyone. Not just me." The audience murmured in agreement. "Understood," Judge Hallberg nodded. She returned to her bench and sat down slowly, the robe suddenly feeling heavier. "Let the record reflect a formal apology is entered into the transcript. And I will personally notify the Veterans Administration liaison that Mr. Cole's file receives immediate priority review." She glanced to the side. "Court security, escort Mr. Cole and General Langford out with respect." But Derek raised a hand. "No need. I can walk out the same way I walked in." He turned, walking slowly toward the courtroom doors. This time, no one whispered. No one dismissed him. Every person stood as he passed. Even the judge. He didn't wear a uniform. He didn't carry medals. But as the doors opened and the morning light spilled in, Derek Cole walked out with something even more powerful, his dignity, fully intact. Outside the courthouse, the wind was cool, and the city moved on like nothing had happened. Derek stood on the steps for a moment, taking in the quiet. General Langford stepped beside him but said nothing at first. He knew this wasn't a moment that needed words. "Was that enough for you?" the general finally asked, tilting his head slightly. Derek exhaled, watching the crowd disperse behind him. "It's not about enough. It's about being seen. For once." Langford nodded. "You did more than get seen. You reminded them who this country should be standing up for." Derek gave a small, tired smile. You think she meant the apology? I think she meant it more than she's ever meant anything behind that bench. Derek looked out toward the street. I don't want a medal. I don't want a headline. I just want to make sure no one like me ever walks into that courtroom and gets silenced again. Langford clapped him gently on the shoulder. Then maybe today wasn't justice. But it was a shift. And shifts move mountains. Derek nodded. And together, without a single camera or crowd to applaud, they walked down the steps and melted into the city, two men carrying truth, scars, and the quiet strength of a moment that would echo long beyond that courtroom. The following week, Courtroom 3B felt different. Judge Hallberg arrived early. She didn't speak to anyone as she entered, just sat quietly at her bench, reading every case file with focused intensity. Not skimming. Not assuming. Word had spread. Staff spoke in hushed tones about the Derek Cole hearing. No one called it by its docket number. No one dared to forget. She'd received letters. From veterans. From advocates. Even from other judges. Some were angry. Others were grateful. All of them reminded her that the bench she sat on carried more weight than rulings or gavel strikes, it carried lives. She had ordered a framed printout of one line from Derek's file. It now sat inside her chambers, risked his life to save 7. Asked for nothing in return. That day, when a nervous young man entered with a legal aid attorney and trembling hands, Judge Hallberg did not raise her voice or interrupt. She looked him in the eyes and asked one thing, tell me your story. And for the first time in years, her courtroom didn't feel like a machine. It felt like a place where someone might actually be heard. All because one man walked in crying, and walked out carrying the respect he always deserved. Months passed. Derek Cole never returned to Courtroom 3B. He didn't have to. His case was quietly resolved, his benefits restored, and his name cleared in every system that once buried it under red tape. But something else lingered, something deeper than a legal correction. Judge Hallberg began hosting monthly veterans outreach sessions in her court. No press. No speeches. Just listening. Former service members came in hesitant, often silent at first. And they left knowing someone was finally taking them seriously. The legal community noticed. Other judges followed suit. Training seminars included a new section, Unconscious Bias in the Courtroom. And at the center of those presentations was one name, Derek Cole. He never sought attention, but his quiet defiance rewrote the rules of how people were seen, not just as case numbers, but as human beings with stories worth hearing. One afternoon, Judge Hallberg received a handwritten letter. No return address. Just a single sentence inside, it wasn't about the apology. It was about what you did after. She smiled softly, folded the note, and placed it in her desk drawer next to her gavel, a reminder that real justice begins not with authority, but with humility. Years later, Courtroom 3B had changed, not in structure, but in spirit. New clerks came and went. New faces filled the gallery. But one thing remained, a small plaque discreetly mounted near the judge's bench. Most visitors never noticed it. But those who paid attention read the inscription, let every voice be heard. Let no story be dismissed. In honor of Derek Cole, he never sought credit. Never returned to take a bow. He simply lived on, quietly, as the symbol of what one man's dignity could do to awaken a system that had long forgotten how to listen. Judge Hallberg eventually retired. Her final court day was quiet, unceremonious by her request. But in her closing remarks, she said one thing, I once silenced the wrong man. And that moment did more to teach me about justice than all the years I spent studying law. That day, I didn't lose credibility. I found it, when I admitted I was wrong. In the end, Derek's legacy wasn't forged in medals or media. It was forged in change, quiet, lasting, undeniable. And that was more powerful than any courtroom victory.